Okay, looks like we've hit the top of the hour, so we'd like to get started. Welcome to the September Meetoo webinar, where we're going to be looking at some practical ways to help improve your Q&A sessions using Meetoo. I'm Dermott and this is Amy.
Hello.
And we're both from the customer success team here at Meetoo. So, as always, please do connect to our Meetoo session that we've got set up. We're going to be running a few polls and hopefully you're going to be asking us some questions. And we also want you to send in your best Q&A tips to share with the team. So please put that on the board as well. So you can get the Meetoo app natively on your iOS or Android device, or you can access the web app on any browser-enabled device at web.meetoo.com. And our meeting ID for today is 139669033. And we can see that we've got quite a few people joined actually on the webinar. And I want to make sure as many people as possible actually join up to Meetoo so that you can fully participate in the session. We've added the joining instructions here on the slide, obviously, but we've also got our web app link on every slide. So if you haven't managed to get joined in, you can do as we go through. Okay, let's get started then. We've got three main areas of focus for the session. First of all, how to encourage participation in your Q&A sessions. Then we'll move into facilitating a Q&A with Meetoo. And then we'd like to talk a little bit about using the Meetoo Projector Display during your Q&A sessions. We'll then have a bit of Q&A of our own at the end. But just to let you know, we're going to be going through at a bit of a pace this morning, as there is quite a lot that we want to get through, as many people run their Q&A sessions in different ways. So what we want to do is just make sure that everybody has got a practical thing that they can take away and implement in their next session. But first of all, I just want to kick off with a couple of polls. So first of all, how do you currently manage Q&A during your sessions? So, whether that's a lecture or a conference or training or whatever your session is, how do you manage Q&A? And you've got multiple options here. So is it verbal questions? Do you get people to submit on paper? Do you take them by email, by SMS? Do you use an app? Or is there something else that we've missed off? Or do you not use Q&A at all? And I want to give you up to 6 options. So if you use all of those top 6, select them all and then press send, or just select the ones that apply to you. I'm not sure if we're going to see anybody that doesn't do Q&A, but hopefully then those people will go away with lots to implement at their next session. Okay, I think we've got a few responses in there now, so we'll just take a look and see what you've all said. Okay, so everybody takes verbal questions. That's really good. I mean, during a session, that is, the nicest way to actually take them. If people are willing to stand up or take a microphone and actually, ask their question. Still a few of you submitted on paper. I guess, if it's not broken, you should carry on doing that. A few people using an SMS system. That's not surprising, but really good to see over half of you actually using an app. So that puts us in a good place to hopefully get you to use our app. Those others, please do fire them in on the Q&A board just so we can pick up and see what those are. I've got another question now. How do you usually treat questions during your Q&A session? So this is about the fundamental of whether you identify them all, always. Do you always use anonymous as a way of treating those questions, or do you use a mix of both depending on the very nature of the session that you're running? Okay, looks like we're getting a few more people voting there, so that's really good. People are joining in, and I will take it there. Okay, right, so over half using a mix of both. So that's good to see that people actually tailor their Q&A session dependent on the meeting or lecture that they're running. So that's really good that people aren't just fixated with doing it in one way. I'm surprised anonymous isn't higher, only a quarter doing it always. We're seeing that quite popular, but that's good to see. So thanks for that. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Amy to get started with our first section, which is how to encourage participation.
So sort of following on from that last poll, one of the key decisions that's needed when running a Q&A session will be whether it's identified or anonymous. firstly identified, or as we call it in the dashboard, profiles on. It's probably quite obvious what the main benefits are here. But one of the main things we're told is that it can make a session more personal. And, sometimes anonymity is just not required. We see identification being used in smaller sessions, so where participants are a bit more familiar with each other. Another scenario where identified is used would be where responses need to be directed or tailored to individuals, or possibly even tracked against an individual. Anonymous sessions are seemingly, as Dermott mentioned, more popular, we find, with our customers. And people are more accepting now of the fact that people will give you more feedback, more questions, and be more honest with the feedback that they give you when it's anonymised. We've got two good examples here of anonymous profiles and how they've sort of been useful. So one is UCL and another is Google. So let's have a look at the UCL example. So if you don't know, UCL is the University College London. So UCL surveyed 171 final year medical students, and 92% said that they would feel too intimidated to ask a question in a lecture with more than 100 students in. So obviously, a high percentage. In an attempt to improve this issue, UCL used Meetoo to gather questions from their students anonymously. And during their use of using Meetoo, they found that over a course of 10 lectures, 213 questions were asked using the Meetoo app from a group of 234 students. So it really had quite an impact and really quite a change from what they'd seen before. Meetoo really did create a bridge between the student and the lecturer. And it allowed students or teaching to be more of a student-centred teaching style, which can often be challenging when dealing with a larger group of students. The effects of using Meetoo were reflected in their subsequent survey of 168 medical students, where 89% felt that teaching at medical school could be improved with the use of Meetoo. So obviously great for us, but a really clear finding that the Q&A and anonymity worked well for them. So looking at our second example, and just to note that this isn't an example of where Meetoo was used, but hopefully it is useful in illustrating why certain situations are important in providing anonymity. So in early August this year, Google cancelled their one of their internal town hall meetings after employees' questions and names had been published outside the company, so publicly online. And employees experienced online harassment due to the questions and comments that they'd asked. So the guarantee of anonymity is fundamental in gathering genuine opinion and informing company decisions in some situations. So let's move on and take a look at another one of our tips for encouraging participation. So this is a simple yet very effective tip, and it's just introducing the technology. So doing this at the beginning of any session, as we did earlier, is absolutely crucial and is likely to determine the successfulness of the use of the technology within that session. You can do this by including some simple instructions. As people join the session, they can read those instructions and join. These should be very clear and concise and be verbally encouraged at the start, where you can set expectations of what you'll be asking people to do during the session, whether it be asking questions, voting, or discussion. So to assist with this, we have built an instruction slide, which you can see the details of how to do that on the screen in front of you now. And this is built into our PowerPoint add-in, which automatically builds the slide for you, as we also used at the start of this session. There is also another option of an invite button in your control dashboard, which generates an email with everything your participants need to know to access your Meetoo session. You would only use this if you feel that you need to prepare people before the session, sort of in advance, so that they're ready and prepared. We always suggest having some form of instruction visible on all of your slides. So as you can see at the bottom of the slide here, we've got instructions of how you can participate if you join the session late. So simply just add the Meetoo URL, so web.meetoo.com, and then that all-important 9-digit ID, which people need to join your session, just like we have here. So I think, what are we going to look at next? We're going to look at encouragement. So once you have ensured all of your participants have the correct instructions of how to access the app, you do need to encourage people ongoing throughout your session. So you can do that by slides, in-app content, and periodic announcements, just reminding people to send their questions to you along the way and engage in your Q&A. The one thing that we see influence Q&A participation the most is probably just direct encouragement from the presenter, whether that be a lecturer or host. So having someone speak very open and honestly about how the Q&A session is going to be run and how important it is really reinforces the value of it. Further to this, during your session, the ongoing acknowledgement of questions that have been already submitted through the app will illustrate the relevance and power of the Q&A session. So it's great to see we do already have some questions come in, which we will take a look at a little bit later on. So in summary, to encourage participation, clearly introduce the technology, set expectations, and encourage use at the start and ongoing throughout your session. Once that's done, you can then move on to the exciting bit, which Dermot's going to take us through, which is facilitating our Q&A session.
Thanks very much, Amy. Okay, so facilitating a Q&A session with Meetoo. Now, we've obviously said that you need to make a few decisions up front, but you also need to decide on the behaviour of Meetoo within your Q&A functionality. And by this I mean choosing whether to have it set to a moderated mode or an unmoderated mode, also known as auto-publish. Now, many Meetoo users like to run as transparent a Q&A session as possible, and so opt for that unmoderated mode, meaning that all participant questions will automatically appear on the Q&A board in that app, and thus allowing everybody else to be able to like those questions as they choose. Now, whilst this is the most open and honest way to run a Q&A session, it is without its pitfalls. Now, probably the main one being that there is that potential for unsavoury comments to be posted and then seen by all. So to try and mitigate this, you do still have the ability to remove comments or questions from that Q&A board via the control dashboard. So if you are worried about that potential happening, it's worth somebody keeping an eye on the dashboard to swiftly remove anything that could cause any problems. That being said, though, an unmoderated Q&A is great for encouraging and empowering people to actually ask their own questions. You know, it can be a great morale boost for employees to see leadership taking all and any questions during their town hall or all-hands session. And then in an educational or training environment, unmoderated Q&A actually allows students to see, other people's questions, which are often, the same as what they had, and then allowing them to feel, a bit more comfortable in that environment and taking the opportunity to better understand the content and improve their learning. Then we look at a moderated Q&A session. Now with that brings probably the ultimate level of control to the session host or lecturer. And although moderating all submissions that come in can actually reduce the level of contribution that you receive, you can overcome this through the encouragement tips that Amy's already given you. A trick that we often see being used by presenters is by making a point of saying something like, we're getting lots of great questions in through the app already, so if you haven't done yourself, please make sure you send in any of your burning questions so we can answer them during our Q&A session. And that actually really works to get the ball rolling a bit so people understand that the system is real and working. But moderating your Q&A content in Meetoo does actually give you huge flexibility in terms of how you run your session. Now, one of the popular examples is actually to publish a short list of the questions that you want to answer, so that they appear for all your participants to see it and then like those questions as they want to, so you can see the priority order to them. There are lots of great and simple options when it comes to Meetoo and Q&A, but for the sake of the session, we're probably just going to focus on a couple of the more popular ones. So we look at having a host in control. So when the host is in control, they can simply have that control dashboard on an iPad or another tablet device, of course, which is a great way to really control that moderation and not be anchored to a laptop, at a lectern or on a table or something like that. You can also use the favourites function to actually select the questions that you want to answer at all, or even answer them first. And this is something that nobody else gets to see. It's just for the presenter or host's view. But this can also feed through to the Meetoo Projector Display that we're going to come on to and talk about shortly. We then look at a situation where you have a moderator actually involved. So in environments where resources are available, of course, such as conference and events or larger lectures, where you can have somebody as a designated moderator and they're actually viewing all those submitted questions. And then they're actually making them available to the person who is answering the questions in that shortlist style that I mentioned earlier. This approach, it really is a good two-stage moderation process where the presenter, is allowing somebody to moderate for them and give them that shortlist, but they still have the ultimate control over the questions that they want to answer.
Oh, right. So time to give you some examples. So we have seen a real increase in the number of customers using Meetoo to facilitate Q&A sessions during virtual meetings and classes. So as more learning is done online and workforces are increasingly remote, virtual sessions are becoming an everyday occurrence. So a first example of that is the University of Southampton. They use Meetoo alongside Skype to allow guest lecturers and subject experts to join their class from the comfort of their own home or from their workplace. The students then ask questions to the lecturer via Meetoo, or the guest lecturer, which are answered directly by the guest lecturer over Skype video conferencing. And the guest lecturer can choose the responses that they want to answer simply by just reading the responses through the app, just as a student would. In this example, they most often use Meetoo unmoderated and with anonymity. And in fact, a webinar that we ran early this month goes into a little bit more detail of that particular case study that was run by a lecturer at Southampton, which you can find on our YouTube channel. eBay, another example, run town hall meetings, so company meetings across multiple different locations and countries, and they utilise Meetoo to ask the presenter, which is often their company leaders, any burning questions. In this example, they most often use Meetoo anonymously and moderated. So their internal comms team often would moderate the discussion or questions, and they use the favouriting feature, which Dermott just talked through, to select key questions for the presenter to then answer. So they really do use that two moderated approach. It's important to point out that we have just given a couple of examples of ways to facilitate your Q&A, but there are many more possibilities, and Dermot or myself will be happy to discuss that with you on a one-to-one basis at any time. I'm going to hand over to Dermot now. I think we're going to go through our final section, which is using the projector display.
Thanks very much, Amy. Yeah, so actually, many of the users that I speak to, this is Meetoo users I'm talking about here, they're not aware just how flexible the projector display actually is, or even some of them have never used it before. Just to quickly explain for those people, the Meetoo Projector Display is simply a web page that you launch from your dashboard, and it can be viewed on any browser-enabled device, so you can access this projector anywhere. Then it can be used as main screen display. It can be used for content for side screens, but also, as I touched on earlier, as a personal display for presenters or panelists. But even within all of these little examples, there are several different options. But we just want to concentrate on a couple of them just now. So, firstly, looking at using the projector on a main screen, showing it here in unmoderated mode and sorted by the number of likes. Now, this is probably the most popular use case in university lectures and conference and event environments. This is because it is the most transparent type of Q&A session, and is you've got your participants effectively voting up the most important questions or topics using that like functionality. It's also the most straightforward from a presenter or lecturer perspective, because they don't need to worry about moving anything around or choosing which questions. We then look at my next example here, which is quite regularly used, I guess, by people using Meetoo as an employee engagement tool during town halls or all-hand type meetings. And this is showing the favorited messages only. And this can be achieved whether using Meetoo in fully moderated or unmoderated modes. And it's probably most effective when the person answering the question actually controls which questions are favorited and when. Now, this technique actually allows those chosen messages or questions to be displayed and removed in real time on that projector display. So really creating a nice dynamic Q&A session where the focus is actually on specific questions or groups of questions rather than everything that's been submitted so far. I then just want to have a quick look at the use of Meetoo's projector on content screens, side screens, or even remote displays. And this is probably more often found in a meetings and event environment. However, I think that the reasons behind it is worth a quick mention. But in this scenario where maybe you've got long periods between Q&A sessions, having visible displays independent of that main content, whether that's PowerPoint content or video, actually showing the submitted Q&A questions can be a great way of really encouraging other people to actually send their questions in if they haven't already. Some of the preferred formats of this are either sorted by likes or even by the most recent on top, so they are current to potentially what's happening during the session. And now just to touch on everything that you can show on that projector display, whether it's on a main screen or on side screens, can actually be viewed in that mobile format on an iPad. This technique can be really, really slick if a host or moderator is working in the background, feeding those questions through to that personal projector that's on the iPad for the person answering the questions. And if that presenter doesn't fancy carrying around an iPad with them, you can always show it just on a comfort monitor, as would be most likely to happen in a meetings and event environment, I guess. Okay, I think we're probably running a little bit over, so we just jump into a bit of Q&A now, Amy. So,
yeah, it seems to have been quite active on the Q&A board, which is great.
Yes, we've had a few good sessions. Mixos will be sending the slides. We'll be sharing the recording, and yes, we can share out the slide deck as well afterwards, so that's fine. Paul Jones has mentioned social media questions. So this is based on our first poll, or our poll at the start, asking how people did it. How could I forget social media? So thanks for that. But yes, it seems to be a good way for events, but not always people are happy to do it.
So Ron, a lecturer, you don't have the luxury of an assistant. So I think that's probably the case for most lecture halls, apart from maybe some of those larger sessions. And I would say the scenario I hear of the most is people using it unmoderated and anonymous. It does come obviously with its drawbacks, and you have to be confident enough to handle any sort of unruly comments. I think in the last webinar, one of the lecturers from Southampton was sort of saying, they get things like "nice tie, sir," and hopefully that's as bad as it gets. But it's just sort of what you feel most comfortable with. So yeah, so that's probably the best way to run Meetoo, as long as you can get around those sort of issues that could happen.
Now, this one's not necessarily a question, but it's a great point from Meta Taylor. Where difficult and controversial issues are concerned, presenters need to be ready to handle anonymous questions. If they're ignored, the process is undermined, so get them on board early. It's a really, really good point there. Yeah. You've got to set expectations. People need to understand how it's going to work, but also how it's all going to be treated. So that's a really great bit of advice. What's the best way to run Q&A if you have lots of questions from a large audience? How do you manage the expectations of the audience when trying to get through all the questions? That's a good question from Paul there.
I think sort of in my experience, it would be, answer what you can, pick out, use the most liked function. So maybe pick out a couple of those top liked questions. But you also have the facility to export the questions afterwards into Excel, and you can answer them in your own time and then email them out. People really do appreciate you taking the time to answer those questions, so you can't always answer them in the session, but do try and build that time in, because if you're asking people to give you questions, then it is nice to be able to answer them there.
Laura's got a question here that, Amy, you're probably best qualified to answer. So with regards to the data from UCL, were the lectures with the same cohort, and if so, did they see a gradual increase in participation?
I don't know exactly the answer to that, but the case study or example use from UCL is actually going to be published on our website shortly, so there will be more details coming. I know it was 10 separate lectures, but as to whether they were all the same students or different groups of students, I'm not sure, but I could definitely put that question forward. Maybe we'll try and include that in our case study as well.
Good stuff, and thanks, Adam. Adam helped answer one there. Mick's got a good point here. So, always puzzled by reviewed tab in moderated Q&A. I understand the reason for published or hidden, but not the purpose of reviewed. So that's mainly for a situation where you've got a separate person moderating the content, and they want to push it through to the presenter or person answering the questions, but don't want anybody else to see it. Because obviously if you push it to published, then all the participants will see those questions. But actually, if you just want to push that shortlist through that we discussed, that's the best way to do it, to put it into reviewed.
And I think it's probably a scenario that is more used in meetings and events than maybe in education.
Okay. A student as a moderator, that's a great point or question from Adam, and certainly that was a tip that we got from a member of the team at Crystal Interactive Meetings, and he said it's great to either have a student or an employee, if it's more of a workplace environment, be the kind of sidekick to the audience and get those questions and then put them to whoever is answering the questions. That works really well, and it kind of really feels that those questions have an ownership from the participants.
Something that also jumps to mind was a tip from a lecturer, which was actually they find sometimes that students self-moderate, so you might come across a bad comment, and I think in the employee situation it would be the same, and people would get protective and they actually put down that person, so it discourages those bad comments. So often, even if there is bad comments, you don't need to worry, the audience will deal with it.
Laura's got a question here about the case studies. So she'd like to see what impact using something like Meetoo has on peer-to-peer learning. Are they in any of our case studies? There are quite a few case studies on there. I'm not sure if you know them all in depth to know if that's covered off, but we will post a link out to where our case studies are, so you can see that there. So Ron, another question here. If we're not running it anonymously and want to track how people vote, can't people just put a fake name in anyway? Yes, absolutely. So, the way the profiles currently work in Meetoo, people can put a fake name in there if they want to. But then that puts the onus on the host or lecturer to actually encourage people in the right way. So, if you want them to have their real name, so you can track potentially, vote results, and you can follow up individually with questions afterwards, then encourage them to put their real name in there. And then maybe publishing them all on the board isn't the best type of session, and then you can use the moderated mode to kind of hide that from people a little bit. And
I guess if identity is particularly important, even if you're trying to run, say, a Q&A anonymously, we do have a beta feature for Microsoft integration. So we'd be happy to provide some more information on that if that was of interest.
Sure. Adam's got a good question. I think it's aimed at me. It's a good typo. How do you change what the projector shows after you've launched it? Can you have multiple projector views and switch between them? Yes, absolutely. You have them on separate tabs, and you can just relaunch new ones. You can always just click back to go back to the settings and then change the settings. But what we see quite a lot of the time is that people will just have separate browser windows open with the different projectors and then just go to them as and when they need them. Does it all run equally on Macs? Certainly in terms of the dashboard and the projector, yes, absolutely that's the case.
And we do have the PowerPoint add-in for Mac as well.
That's great. Is streaming in the app possible? I assume that's streaming of video content or slides. Not currently. It's something that we've been discussing internally, but there's no promises around any of that sort of thing, I'm afraid, at the moment. But it is something that we're looking at. If it's something that's really important to you, please do get in touch with us directly. You can always email hello@meetoo.com and we can have a chat through all of that. Well, I'm really concerned that we're actually diving over our time quite a lot here. But we will pick up any other questions and respond to them in the Meetoo feed as well as directly afterwards as well. So I'll just hand over to Amy just to talk through a bit of our webinar promotions.
Yep, so we do run regular webinars. We have a webinar every month, so you can find out more about that. I think Dermot's going to post you a link on our webinar page. And we also do run weekly jump starters. So for people that need a little bit of a refresher on how to use Meetoo, or maybe you're new to Meetoo, we run those sessions weekly, either at 10 o'clock or 3 o'clock alternately. So please join those sessions. Normally be myself or Dermot probably running them, and it would be great to see you on there.
Okay, so just to practice a little bit about what we always preach on some of our other webinars, we'd like to get your feedback, your brutal, honest feedback, please. Let us know what you think about this webinar. We are going to be sparing our blushes here, so we won't look too embarrassed if it's some low scores, but please, this is the only way that we can improve these sessions, so we really need your true and honest feedback. So was it a waste of time all the way through to was it extremely valuable? And I think and
happy to take feedback in other forms as well if you wanted. It really is valuable to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do post that for us. And then last but not least, we have a little promotion of our YouTube channel and our Trustpilot reviews. Please, if you are a Meetoo user and you've had either a good or bad or indifferent experience, please let us know on Trustpilot. That is really, really important to us. It helps other people, know what to expect from Meetoo. And they're really useful for us to get those scores in. And also the YouTube channel. The recording of this webinar is going to be on there. All our other tutorial videos are on there, and all our previous webinars that Amy and myself has done, and the ones that Amy mentioned earlier from the team of lecturers that are there. So subscribe to our YouTube channel and you'll get all of our content there.
And we will be creating a guide, based on this webinar, and we've got a lot more tips which we didn't have time to quite fit in today, and we've already run over, so we haven't got time to share them today, but they will be available in our guide, which should be coming out shortly.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you on our next session, or we look forward to talking to you personally at some point soon. Thanks very much. And
Thanks. Bye-bye. Have a good day.